Hi, my name is Damien and welcome to GoFly Online. Today we're going to be looking at fueling an aircraft, in particular a recreational light sport aircraft behind me, which is a Sling 2. It has both a left and a right-hand fuel tank. Now when you first start learning to fly, your instructor will actually show you how to fuel the aircraft. So make sure you listen. But today we're just going to run through the basics of fueling. So first of all, we take the fuel cap off and we do a dip with our fuel dipstick. Even though we do have a fuel gauge inside the aircraft, we always manually check the fuel. And I can see I've got 15 litres in there. I want to put an extra 20 litres in there. Now, we use the Rotax injected or carby engines, and that uses around about 18 litres an hour. In Australia, the legal minimums is the fuel required for your flight. For a 1 hour flight, that would be 18 litres, plus any taxi fuel, plus a minimum for visual flight rules is 30 minutes reserve for that aircraft type. So that's around about 27-28 litres of fuel required for a Rotax engine for a 1 hour flight. At this flight school, we like to make sure that we have a minimum of 25 litres aside, or 50 litres in total for a 1 hour flight for any other contingencies such as weather. So we've checked it, we're going to add an extra 20 litres to the aircraft. Now in Australia, you can check your visual flight guide rule book under fueling. We need to be somewhere between 5 to 15 metres from a building, depending on what sort of building that is. So we just have a general rule here that always be 15 metres from the nearest hangar or building before we can fuel. Other things to keep in mind is that we make sure that the aircraft hasn't got the park brake on, that we can actually move the aircraft in an emergency or in a hurry if we have to. Here at GoFly, we have a certified electric fuel tank. For the Rotax engine, we can use premium unleaded or we can use avgas. They actually prefer premium unleaded because there's no lead content and it's actually cheaper per litre as well. We can also use a jerry can to fill the aircraft with. We have 20 litre jerry cans here. Now it's very important, whether we're using a jerry can or a certified fuel tank, that we use what we call a static line. Now a static line looks like this. It's attached to the fuel tank here, and sort of like a bull clip here that attaches to something metal on the aircraft. What this does is, on the Sling aircraft, it's underneath here on a tie down point, we can put it. It stops any static build up when we're transferring fuel to the aircraft. Very important, and it's a legal requirement we have the static line on. And that's the same with jerry cans as well. For the jerry can here, we actually have a mobile static line that we use that fixes to the jerry can and to the aircraft as well before we fuel the aircraft. These must be on before we actually fuel the aircraft. Other thing to keep in mind is that we need a fuel filter in between our fuel source and the aircraft. Now with our electric certified fuel tank here, we actually have a fuel filter here, certified fuel filter, before it actually goes into the aircraft. If you're using a jerry can, you need to use a mobile fuel filter like such. This is a twin one. Which goes in the tank, and the jerry can gets poured into the fuel filter, and then from the fuel filter into the tank. Now there will be a bit of fuel left in the bottom of the fuel filter. We make sure that we don't put that in the aircraft. We put that either into what we call a slop bucket, like a spare bucket, or a container, and that can be used for cleaning. So we've put the static vent on, we've turned our electric pump on. We can then obviously fuel the aircraft. We want to make sure that when we're putting the nozzle into the aircraft, we don't chip any paint on the side of the hole that goes into the tank. So very carefully put the nozzle in, and then we can watch our fuel tank meter to put the 20 litres in. Once again, once we've got the 20 litres, we wait a bit, carefully bring the nozzle out, back onto the fuel tank, and then we can dip the tank again just to confirm that we've got the correct amount of fuel in there, which we have. And then the fuel cap goes back on. Very important, after every time we fuel, we do a fuel drain with one of these. And that's just to confirm that there's no contaminants or water, for instance, in the fuel. On the Sling aircraft, we have 2 fuel drain points, both left and right tank. And we need to do this after every time we fuel. Well, they're the basics of fueling. As I said before, any questions, please see your qualified flight instructor or your flight school. Thanks for joining me today.